physics, we understand that no energy is created or destroyed, that nothing ultimately is created or destroyed. There is no waste. Energy is constantly changing at various rates from one thing to another. When we die, our physical body will not disappear, will not vanish. Rather, it will be transformed into the ecological environment out of which it was formed. The liquid in our body will evaporate and rain down upon the planet, or will penetrate directly into the earth or into whatever mechanism that human culture has created to capture the waste. Waste is a human thought. It is a human idea that holds space for that which we do not understand what to do with. If we have a plastic bag that we don't know what to do with, we recategorize it as waste and throw it away because we don't know what to do with it. And so we call it garbage. Garbage is a human synthetic paradigm and thought that doesn't exist in nature. It doesn't exist anywhere except in the human mind, where we transform energy from one thing into another, can't figure out what to do with it, and so we relabel it as waste. The human body will ultimately nourish everything around it. The blood has nitrogen and will nourish the trees in the same way that the trees have nourished our body, both with breath and with producing fruits and foods. The bones will nourish and become part of the mineral spectrum that is transformed into new archaeological and ecological shapes. Our flesh may be consumed by other animals, which in turn will be decomposed into nourishment of the environment. And so, in a very real sense, if we look at what we call the physical dimension, there is nothing but a process of our parents consuming ecological energy and giving birth to an infant, who in turn consumes ecological energy, and which is ultimately returned to the ecology out of which it emerged. When we look at other forms of energy, when we look at the energy of soul, spirit, or consciousness, we again have a phenomena. In mathematics, it's called set theory, where when you are in a set, you are by definition smaller than the set, which means from a logistical perspective, you cannot fully understand or perceive that which is outside the set. And so there is a journey. There is a journey, just like the body takes form out of the ecological framework that surrounds us and participates in an identity called a human being, a human animal perhaps, and then returns the exact same amount of energy that was used to form the body, returns to the ecological environment. It took atoms and molecules to build this body, and there are atoms and molecules left over at the end that become new things. Nothing is created or destroyed, it is simply transformed. From outside the set of human consciousness, energy comes in to the form of the human ego, which is a lens. Some would say an illusionary lens, a partition between the consciousness that is outside of the ego and the consciousness that is inside the ego. We come into the lens in the birth process, the insemination, the gestation, the birth process, the moving through the entire ages, and ultimately the death of the body. And within the birth process, the entire ecological framework of the planet's evolution is captured. Hour by hour, month by month. Eons of Earth history are encapsulated in those 9 months. A fractal microcosm of the entire planet's history, of the development from plant to animal, the moving into the water, the coming out of the water onto dry land, the time of being horizontal, the slow movement towards verticality, the slow development of the human brain, the awareness of language-based consciousness. The entire history of the planet is relived and recreated in the life of every infant, incarnating, coming into self-awareness, coming into this present moment. In the process of going through a lifetime, there is a wheel of time, beginning with inception, ending with the soul, the spirit, leaving the human body. At whatever age, in a natural cycle, this would be a mature age, 60, 70, 80, 100. We move through the wheel of ages. And at each point, as we move through the process of time, at each point, we either come to consciousness, acknowledge, accept, participate in, are present for the wheel as it turns, as it makes contact. Because although much like a DVD, where the entire movie is contained, just holding the disc, it's all there. As the laser-like focus of the human ego traveling the rounds through time, unfolds that disc, unfolds that package, having the freedom to put different filters on different events, the freedom to change angle, the freedom to pull back, the freedom to pull forward, the freedom to relabel things with language. The tapestry of the disc is there, but how we experience it, through a fog or through crystal clarity, through belief filters of pain, the process of shaping the lens of the individual is a process of dressing consciousness with beliefs, with paradigms, and with language. The beliefs, the paradigms, the language shape the lens that reads the disk of time as we move through it. And within the probability field, within the possibility field, within the actuality of beliefs, paradigms, and language, within a paradigm of duality, we have tension, we have conflict. Within tension and conflict, there is pain. Pain in the presence of time creates fear. Fear is pain in the past anticipated in the future. You need a future for there to be fear. You need the idea that that pain could happen again in order to tense up in preparation for the shock, for the fear. Now, in order for life, in order for movement, in order for evolution to take place, energy needs to flow from the spring to the river to the ocean. From idea into the feelings, into the body, into manifestation. From the kernel into the first few leaves, the germination, into the corn stalk, and into the corn. Wind, water, earth, fire. At some level, it's all breathing. It's all a cycle. Within a dualistic paradigm, it's a cycle of in and out. Within the most complex paradigms, it is a circle. There's not just the breathing in and the breathing out. There's an entire wheel of inception to death. In one of our great poems, there's the line, "To return once more to the place where we began, only this time to know it for the first time, as we enter the body without language." A key building block of the human ego, missing. We are unconscious, we are undifferentiated from the totality, from that which is outside the set. As we take on language, as we take on belief, as we take on pattern, through the process of ingesting cult or culture, we slowly learn to see the world through ideas, through paradigms, through beliefs, through language, such that by the time we return to the ancient part of life, we have language to touch the innocence, to touch the fragility, to touch the vulnerability of the same region of the psyche into which we were born. The dying process, at its most beautiful, is an exquisite return to the innocence of the infant with language intact, to know that place for the first time, to understand, thus creating the bond, the sacred bond throughout most of our 10,000 cultures. In human history, the sacred bond between the grandparent and the great-grandparent and the infant. the one in the state unconsciously, the other in the state with language, both able to resonate deeply in their biological rhythms, in their emotional rhythms, in their sensitivity and fragility, both ill-suited in many ways for a modern world. If we are able to transit throughout time without the shock of unrepaired trauma, without the disease of PTSD, of the fixation, which comes when the ego is asked to digest more energy than it has been designed or is capable of holding, either as a physical body, when a tank shell moves towards the body at an intensity that absorbs and consumes the body. The body disintegrates. When psychological energy moves towards the ego with a force and with a mass that overcomes language, that overcomes the narrow lens, capable of digesting and processing that energy, we move into dissociation, we move into disintegration, we move into shock, we reactivate the 200 million-year-old reptilian brain. In a fight, flight, freeze mechanism, we devolve into the animal state. And we become fixated, arrested, compulsively repeating a moment in time held in place until the weight is lifted, until the support arrives, until a circle is willing to hold and gather, to divide up that energy in doses capable of being digested in language, capable of being digested with the human heart, with the human body. There are always enough people on the planet to divide the energy of trauma, the energy of force. And yet, within the paradigm of cult or culture, within the beliefs and thoughts that divide us into isolated units, there are rarely enough people in our culture who are willing to gather and hold the circle. Life, reality, is a refraction of fractal patterns, of energy of light in different densities, in different formats, over time and over a vast array of scales. The very process of inception to being ready to be born captures the entire history of the planet. The very movement from in the womb to out of the womb is a cycle of birth. The first 3 days of bonding with the initial goddess, with the mother, encapsulates the entire relationship history, the entire marriage cycle, from recognition, falling in love, bonding. It's encapsulated in the first 3 days with the first goddess, with the first environment. the maturation process of a child, forming a bond or a dissociation with both the masculine and the feminine parent, encapsulates the entire relationship with the self, with the masculine part of the self and the feminine part of the self, with the part that has structure, that enters reality through intention and conscious structure and evokes emotional state, and the part of reality and the part of the psyche that enters through presence, through spontaneous emotional state and seeks thought, seeks belief, seeks ideas and language to cloak the experience, to make it conscious. The dance back and forth between the masculine and feminine is embodied and symbolized in the dance between the infant and the masculine and the feminine parent. As we move into the wheel of thought through the lens of language, there is no thought you can think that is not cloaked in words. It's creating an interference pattern through the instrument of the mind, an interference pattern of words relating to other words, relating to other words, relating to other words, relating to other words, and an awareness that there is some part of us that is outside of the set of words. And it is the interference pattern of that part of us which is captured in consciousness through language with that which is free of the imprisoning container of the limitations of language, that creates the tension in which we become awake with I am. I am this, 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 I am not this, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this. A tension between the feminine that says, yes, I am this, and the masculine that says, no, I am not this. And that which transcends the masculine and feminine paradigm, that which is outside the set. That is, I am the one who has no name. Because to name me is to bring me into the set, and there is a part of me far bigger than the set. There is a part of me that exists beyond the set of language. There is a part of me in the unconscious, outside the lens of the ego's language-based ideas. And so we have consciousness in the distinction between that which is language and that which is not, between that which is this and that which is this and that which is this and that which is this. We have consciousness in the distinction of language overlaid on the distinction of space-time, overlaid on the distinction between the heart and the mind and the body, different regions, different densities of the same energy. And out of every thought comes a feeling. When we think it will be a beautiful day today, there is a feeling. When we think the stove is hot, I might bump into it. There is a feeling. Out of thought comes a feeling. Out of feelings come thoughts. When we feel fear, our mind searches for memories, for patterns of energy that connect with fear. Out of thoughts become feelings, out of feelings become thoughts. and there is sensation. Now, within the circle of the ages, there is an entire wheel from innocence, from helplessness to dependency, to independence, to possibilities for dominance, possibilities for masculine expression, for feminine expression to lead and to follow. There is the entire cycle of ages between birth and death. In the mental wheel, there is the full spectrum of thoughts and ideas. There are thoughts that we call hateful thoughts. There are thoughts that we call loving thoughts. There are thoughts that we call miraculous thoughts. There are thoughts that we say, I don't believe that. There are thoughts that don't make sense, that we don't look at because they don't fit within our paradigm. If we don't have a paradigm of relationship as a spiritual practice, we don't have the thought, how much did my relationships today support my spirituality? The thought does not enter because it's outside the frame of a lust-based paradigm. If our paradigm is relationship as sexual conquest, the frame is too narrow for the thought, how did my relationship interactions today serve my spirituality? The zoom-in lens of the ego is more narrow and cannot grasp that pattern of energy, though it is there to be grasped once the paradigm expands to include it. Paradigm is a set. We cannot understand that which is beyond the set of our current paradigm because it is beyond the set. It's outside the frame. The ego is a zoom-in lens. And while it offers great detail and great nuance of consciousness, because everywhere you turn the lens, it sees a new detail. It's like looking at a tree and seeing a leaf, and moving it and seeing another leaf and another leaf and another leaf and another leaf. And there's all these leaves. But the ego can never see the tree because it's zoomed in too tightly. It's focused on the present moment, in which the tree, the patterns of time throughout history, the patterns of time in the breath into and out of physicality, are too big to be captured by the zoom-in lens. There is the full spectrum of thoughts. There are the full spectrums of feelings. The heart is like a full spectrum thermometer. When the weather gets cold, the heart registers feelings that are cold. Hate is a cold feeling. When the weather is cold, the heart registers feelings that alert us through the instrument of the human heart that there is a cold environment around us. When we look at a thermometer and it goes 40 degrees below zero, we realize that outside it's very cold. When we look at a thermometer and it reads 140 degrees Fahrenheit, we realize that it is blistering hot. A thermometer is an instrument that measures, that represents the outer environment on the dimension of temperature. The heart is a multidimensional thermostat, a thermometer that registers the environment in conjunction with our beliefs, paradigms, language. The heart tells us about the relationship between the human ego, our beliefs, our thoughts, our feelings, our language, our culture, as it intersects with environment. In a paradigm of good and evil, in a thought of good and bad people, in a belief that rape is bad, in a definition of language that says this is rape, in physical sensation that says this person is raping me, we feel terrible. The feelings register the coming together of paradigm, language, thoughts, belief, sensation, to say this is a horrendous event. You take the same sensations and you encapsulate it in a BDSM paradigm in which symbolically reenacting certain painful moments can be transcendent, can be healing. The same sensations occur, and the ego registers it very differently and says, I'm grateful this person is taking the time to help me in this way as I requested. It's a different reading. Our heart is an instrument that delivers the equations created from our beliefs, our paradigms, our language, through the lens of thought, through the lens of sensation, all mixing like a test tube chemistry elixir to produce a color, to produce a feeling, to produce a sensation, a feeling that ripples out through the body and says, I feel joy, I feel disgust, I feel rage. They are sensations, they are measurements. They are measurements of the interrelationships between the cult that shapes our consciousness, the body that registers sensation, the thoughts, the beliefs, the paradigms handed to us by our cult, an inheritance. Our thoughts, in so many ways, are handed to us in the basket of words, in the basket of language, a way of refracting chaos through distinctions registered in sound, transmitted and received through the voice and the ears, thought traveling on sound waves that refract the whole in a series of distinctions known as words that show us where to cut the whole into pieces. This is red and this is blue, and we cut the color spectrum into two between these demarcations. This is blue, this is red. And it is an inheritance of culture because our zoomed-in ego lens is incapable of grasping even half of reality. It is incapable of grasping even half of reality. And in that incapability, it is directed on where to put attention and how to divide reality through paradigm and through language. You can think of it as the cultural equivalent of mathematics. how long is that line? Is it a line at all? You see, in high mathematics, the space between here and here is infinite, because you can keep cutting it in half and keep cutting it in half and keep cutting it in half and keep cutting it in half, long beyond where the human eye can see. In the abstract, there is an infinite number of ways to divide a simple something that we call a line. But it is our cult and our language that says that looks about a foot, because a foot is about the size of what? A human foot. That looks about as long as my foot. I call the foot the thing from the ankle down. What's the ankle? Well, the ankle is the thing below the knee. What's the knee? It's all self-referential. It's a complete map of cross-referenced nonsense that we share in a framework of consciousness that we share that does not exist outside the lens capable of perceiving it. The lens of the human heart, the lens of the human mind, the lens of the human body, the lens of language, the lens of paradigms. Language is a paradigm. But we cannot think outside the paradigm of language without language. We are fixated within the region of reality that we name as language, such that if you try and think a thought, you will be within language as you think it. I'm thinking thoughts, and you're hearing words, because in our cult, language and consciousness are inextricably connected, emphasized by a scientific paradigm which has its underpinnings in measurements and numbers, in a masculine emphasis on distinctions. This is 1, this is 2. Why aren't they all just numbers? No. You have to divide the whole into bits first. And then you can play with the bits. But we've all got to agree that this is 1 and this is 2. If we don't agree on that, then it's not okay. We have to agree this is 1 and this is 2 because I said so. And we all agree on that. We all agree that this is called blue. It's not called Wimbam. Why? We all said so. We all agree this is a shirt. It's not a mantle of sacred spirituality. It's a shirt. It's not a hinkang king. It's a shirt. Why? Because we all agreed that it was a shirt. And it's a good thing we're wearing them, because we all agreed that it was immodest to not wear a shirt. And we all agreed that immodest meant not wearing a shirt, not being ashamed of one's body. We all agreed that that was a terrible idea. And that's what makes us a cult. You can't ask a scientist to explain scientifically, in evolutionary terms, why I, on a hot day, have to wear a shirt. The scientist says, this isn't a scientific equation, this is a question for your cult. And you ask the cult, why do we do that? And it's always the same, because that's what we do. That's what makes us different from other cults. That, you see, those cults, they're savages. How do we know? Because they don't wear shirts. Now, if you want us to manipulate you, murder you, shoot you, and rape you the way that we rape savages in our cult history, then don't wear a shirt. if you want us to treat you with what we call respect, i.e. a pompous seriousness without spontaneous displays of deep emotion, then I guess you'd better wear that thing we call a shirt. And so we cannot think, we cannot escape the lens of language and be conscious, because we have defined consciousness as the part of us that digests reality through measurements and numbers. Numbers break up the world in fractal bits, and words break up the world in distinctions, the distinction between blue and pink and black. See, we've just broken up this montage. This was reality until we all said this is blue, this is black, this is pink, this is a necklace, this is a shirt, this is a mustache, this is of this kind of a mustache and not of that kind of a mustache. Endless refractions of an energy spectrum that began spherical, that began unconscious. And if we study the refraction of reality for all of our lives, following the cult lead and making little piles. These are good bits of reality and these are bad bits of reality. This is in the terrain of the cult. Because again, if you ask the scientist which are the good bits of reality and which are the bad bits of reality, they start getting a little puzzled if they're looking through the scientific lens. Because the human shit that we say is a bad part of reality fertilizes the tree that produces the fruit that we say is a good part of reality. Well, if the fruit that is good doesn't exist without the fertilizer from the shit that is bad, how exactly does the cult decide what is good and bad? If carbon monoxide is bad, but it feeds the trees with our exhalation so that it can produce oxygen that is good, how do we come up with the idea that carbon dioxide is bad? It's like, a scientist cannot break a circle down into parts and say that this half of the circle is better than this half of the circle, because it is a wheel. A bicyclist cannot cut the wheel in half and say this part of the wheel, oh, this is great parts of the wheel. This is a wonderful, really important part of the bicycle. This other half of the wheel, get rid of it. Because it's a very bumpy ride with just half of a wheel. If you take half the human body and cut it in half and ask a scientist, which one do you want? Do you want the left half or the right half? The scientist is forced to, communicate that without both halves, you don't really get a functioning body. And so, this fictitious breaking things down into bits and comparing them to other bits is a cult ritual, creating the phenomena of cult consciousness, which then leads, in our case, to a battle supposedly with nature, but a battle with the larger body of which we are a part and out of which we emerged and to which we will return. It is a battle with a part of ourself that we have not yet expanded the lens of the zoomed-in ego to understand, I'm actually fighting with me. And me is experiencing being fought with. And ultimately, if I win the battle to destroy the planet in order to have what I want in my way in my little zoomed-in box, there won't be any me left to enjoy the victory. because this self and this body has always been interconnected with everything else. Now, the feelings produce sensation and also emerge out of sensation. So you have this dance between sensation as an instrument of our relationship with reality and with our feelings. The reality around us, the ecology around us, and our feelings. Our feelings, produced by our thoughts, create sensations. Oh my gosh, grandmother's coming today. The thought produced feelings that produce sensations, mostly in this region here, but they rippled through the body. A sensitive instrument can measure electricity traveling through the body in response to every thought, in response to every feeling produced by every thought. And the electricity rippling through the body creates sensation. Similarly, the sensation of the body pairing with thoughts and feelings creates new sensation. It's very difficult ultimately to break these systems down into pieces, because at the core is a mathematical formula that connects this dot of reality right here with the farthest reaches of the multiverse. And most of us, of course, can barely comprehend what a multiverse is, because we can barely comprehend what a universe is, because we can barely comprehend what our neighbors think, let alone the other side of the political party. We can barely comprehend the insanity between the parts of us that want this and the parts of us that want the opposite. So, the idea that the other side of the multiverse is intimately connected with this little point right here and this little point right here doesn't become present, doesn't come into focus until we consider, for example, as one of literally billions of connection points, the law of gravity. You see, the law of gravity applies throughout the multiverse. There is not a completely different law of gravity on Mars. There's not a different law of gravity in space or on the planet. It is the same constant, expressed in different environments. What this means is that at the edge of the multiverse that has no edge, but as far away as we're able to create the illusion of imagining, there is energy and matter relating to itself that applies or that is influenced by a mathematical formula called gravity. And if somewhere in the multiverse, some consciousness, some relationship changes the law of gravity, the law changes throughout the entire multiverse. The strong force, the weak force, electricity. There are constants that apply to everything we know about reality. And those constants create a relationship. What it means is that if there is a conscious mind, some form of transcendent energy locked within the distinction of language, in some other pattern of relating somewhere in the multiverse. And that influences the constant of gravity, turns the setting of gravity from 1 to 3. When you're dealing with constants, gravity changes in the entire multiverse from 1 to 3 as a setting, as a formula. And suddenly, planets that were uninhabitable become habitable. Suddenly, with a 300% change in gravity from 1 to 3, human life stops existing. Too many things start floating off, or suddenly we are so heavy that our muscles cannot lift our own body off the ground. And it's happening too fast for the millions of years of evolution. We have evolved our set of we can't breathe suddenly. The pressure is too much. The lungs don't have the ability to become 3 times stronger like that. So you take your last exhale, your lungs are not strong enough to overcome the pressure. Neither is anyone else's, and you die. Or a few people preserve themselves in little pressurized bubbles, and the species rebuilds. The gravitational constant connects what's happening here with what's happening here. If we change the gravitational constant here, it changes everywhere within the framework that we consciously comprehend. We are so connected with a reality bigger than our cult consciousness allows us to comprehend. Now, we come down here and we have the full spectrum of personas contained in a container of personality. A persona, this is how I am at a party. This is how I am when someone scares me. This is how I am in a bad mood. This is how I am in a great mood. This is how I am when my teacher humiliates me and I had my period for the first time. This is how I am when my mother tells me I'm lying when I told her that her boyfriend sexually abused me. This is how I am in this environment. The psyche, in the endless color wheel, in the infinite variations of probability, interacting with a given environment, creates a test tube, an elixir of a certain pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. That is an intersection between beliefs, paradigms, language, past experience, the memories, the cult hierarchy of values, one's point on one's hierarchy of human needs, survival, security, love and belonging, etc. That is, that which we are intersects with environment, an environment that is always changing. With the seasons it changes, and we have more certain traits that come forward more in the winter, or certain traits that come forward more in the summer. Mating, for example, tends to increase in the summer. A summer lover. It's summer. I need a boyfriend. As we regulate and control our environment, there is more continuity of persona, a more stable pattern of thinking, feeling, etc. As we create lighting and heating and curated environments that mimic daylight during the evening, the continuity between our daylight personas and our night personas become more constant. Persona is the elixir of the psyche, produced in an intersection with a given environment, contained within a boundary of the overall personality. A boundary. I may get a little bit drunk at the pub. I may be sober at work. I may drive a little bit recklessly when I'm talking on my cell phone because it's a different environment. The environment of driving while talking on a cell phone is different than the environment of driving with one's eyes 100% on the road. So my pattern of behavior changes. I may be a very honest person in general, but when my child is going to prison, I may be willing to lie if I think it'll help my child stay out of prison. Or, in other circumstances, I may be willing to lie if it would help put my child in prison. If that's the dynamic. If the belief is set that if only my child was gotten rid of and learned a lesson, then I would be vindicated. And if only I were vindicated, then I would be lovable. And if only I was lovable, people would love me. If only people loved me, I would survive and feel secure and have a sense of love and belonging and self-esteem, and I would be free. The intersection of the environment and the beliefs, the paradigms, the language, offered and fostered and reinforced by our cult. Thousands of individual personas, broken crudely down through language, 256 million colors and counting, broken down crudely into primary colors, through distinction, through language. We're going to have a simple set of distinctions here, or we're going to have a complex and infinite set of distinctions. Ultimately, the sphere is an infinite number of lines and one at the same time. The line, the masculine expression, the circle, the one, the feminine expression. The color wheel, the sensation wheel, the probability of belief wheel, the wheel of paradigms. No matter what distinction one creates, there is a probability field that is circular. If something can be good, it can be bad. If you can see 2 miles forward, when you turn around, you can see 2 miles backwards. Reality, in so many ways, is circular. Life, growth, evolution is about opening to and becoming conscious. All of this exists whether we accept it or not, whether we see it or not, whether we know it or not. Reality exists in a circular form, whether we see it or not, whether we judge it or not, whether we fight it or not, whether we resist experiencing or not, whether we think about it or not. The ego is like a ring. It is a lens on a journey. When the laser light shines on a particular frame on a DVD, a remarkable feat, with so many millions of different frames, 60 frames a second, 100 frames a second, hours of footage when so many million frames are all on one disk? How does the laser focus on one, then another in just the right order to reveal the narrative? How does the human ego make its way through all of the human ages, through all of the human thoughts, through all of the human feelings, through all of the sensations, all of the personas developed by the environment, and then return into the dissolution of itself, into the dissolving of the lens, so that the human ego no longer exists? It didn't exist before the intersection of cult and body and environment. And it is not created or destroyed. It is transformed. Energy is transformed into the human ego, a zoom-in lens, and then releases the energy from the human ego into something different, into something that transcends the paradigm and the thoughts that the ego uses to understand reality, that transcends that by definition, as the energy is released into something more, into something bigger, smaller, outside of language. I want to talk about the journey of the human ego and how bumpy the ride is, and how this intersects with cult. The more you take these wheels and cut them in half and throw half away, the higher the illusionary percentage of garbage. You see, we in American culture create 102 metric tons of garbage. 102 metric tons for a 170-pound weight. 170 pounds, 102 metric tons. 102 metric tons of things, of energy, that human beings took, turned into something they didn't know what to do with, and then put in a big hole in the ground. Now, this is indicative at a holographic or fractal level, where patterns repeat and repeat at different and smaller scales and different dimensions based on the level of consciousness, which is based on the level of language, which is based on the cult level of maturity of evolution. A sophisticated cult does not have the language for garbage, because a sophisticated cult understands that in a multiverse in which things are neither created nor destroyed, it's just energy moving from one form to another. In a sophisticated cult, all energy is viewed equally and as an asset. We just need to develop the technology to continue the process, having turned energy into something we think of as garbage. As Einstein said, the same level of consciousness that creates the problem is the illusion of garbage, cannot solve the illusion of garbage. Because the kind of consciousness that looks out and says that because I don't know what to do with this, it's garbage, is not the kind of consciousness that can look at it and can turn what was considered garbage into some of the most precious resources for humankind or for the ecology. The kind of consciousness that can create nuclear waste and say, I don't really know what to do with this, is not adequate to take nuclear waste and transform it back into something incredibly valuable. We inherit language, and we inherit cult. We inherit paradigms, we inherit beliefs, we inherit a hierarchy of value. We inherit with that blind spots, biases, including chauvinism, racism, bigotry, valuing money more than human beings. We inherit our cult's inadequacies. And some of these inadequacies are so disintegrated, are so insane, are so absurd that as we're going through the wheel, we get to a terrain where our cult will murder us or go insane rather than deal with some part of reality. We call these taboos, where the cult will not examine, will not know itself in those terrains. And so, as other people enter those terrains within the cult, they are partitioned. A wall is built to put them beyond that wall. Because the same consciousness that creates 102 metric tons for 175 pounds creates an enormous amount of human, quote, waste. Certain human beings are considered garbage. Certain human beings are considered something to be managed and disposed in the exact same level of consciousness used to dispose of physical substance. And certain things about our feelings. Certain feelings are told not to visit us. Certain thoughts, certain ideas are told by the cult that they don't belong and that they cannot be discussed. And the reason that they cannot be discussed, they are taboo. They are outside the bounds of the cult. And of course, when you hack away at the wheel of a bicycle, it becomes a violent ride. And so cults create violence in the clash between the illusion of garbage and the illusion of superiority, the illusion of inferiority, the illusion of superiority, in the distinction of better than, creates violence. People feel pain when they're told that they have no value. People feel confused, guilty, and that they are an imposter when they are told they have superior value. At some level, they know it's not true. When the truth is violated, when the symmetry is violated, when beauty, truth, and goodness are violated, you create pain. When you create pain, you're creating a psychological phenomena of longing for wholeness and separation from wholeness. This is done with divisions. Longing for wholeness, separation from wholeness. Longing for a smooth bicycle ride, feeling the terror of the bumpy ride provided by the cult. Feeling the anger, the resentment, the hatred, the helplessness that I can never have a smooth ride, using the consciousness handed to me by my cult. And that as soon as I try and develop an alternative consciousness, I'm cut down, I'm imprisoned, I'm shamed, I'm blamed, I'm traumatized. Because as much as the cult won't help me have a smooth ride, they will go out of their way to make sure I do not have a viable alternative, particularly if I talk about it. If I keep it to myself, maybe that'll be okay. Don't ask, don't tell comes out of that kind of thinking. When we feel terrified, as we confront a part of ourself, a part of our consciousness, that the cult, that the parental system, that the school system, that the military, that the police, that the cult is poised to punish and traumatize, we suppress and control that part of ourselves to avoid the traumatic violation and helplessness of a superior mass dominating and terrorizing a superior intelligence. The wheel is a superior intelligence to the fractured half. The cult is bigger and more massive in dense physical form than the individual. Superior intelligence meets superior mass. Superior mass in an engagement in force always wins because it is bigger and denser. You have the philosopher, and you have a 10-year-old drug-addicted, crime-lorded gun child with 50 bullets. Who wins? Well, if the trigger is pulled, the 10-year-old addict kills the philosopher. If the philosopher embraces the reality of the 10-year-old and is able to provide a superior path to survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, etc. by the time the kid pulls the trigger, the philosopher wins by inviting the child to cooperate rather than mow him down with a trigger. In a conflict of force, the superior mass wins. In a partnering around intelligence, the intelligence wins. As we move through the energy fields of our lives, our ego becomes fixated, becomes arrested. I can't get older than 4 years old. At 4-year-old, I experienced this horrendous trauma, and then when I asked for help, I was hurt by my parents. And that is just such an overwhelmingly terrifying thing that could happen again any time. I just can't get over. And so I'm stuck at 4 years old. Every time there's a threat, I feel 4 years old, I feel terrified, I feel helpless, I feel overwhelmed, and I can't deal with it. My ego, as it passes through the ages, is arrested at the intersection of an age, of a traumatic energy, and a cult unwilling to help. So we have an arresting in age. We have an arresting in thoughts. I hate my family. I hate this. But I'm terrified of saying that. But I don't want to lie. But I'm terrified of saying that. So I'm arrested. I'm bound up. I can't get above 4 years old. I can't get beyond the thought that I hate. I can't get beyond the terror that if I communicate the truth, I can't get around my thought that I want to be honest. I'm bound up. I'm arrested. The wheels have ground to a halt. Because as any bicyclist will tell you, if you're going down a hill and you're committed that one spoke in the wheel, one spoke in one wheel, does not touch the ground, because that's a bad spoke, and that spoke doesn't deserve to be on the wheel. If you are committed to one spoke not making contact with the ground, the entire bicycle stops and freezes until such time as the bicyclist is willing to accept the wheel turning, is willing to embrace the reality that one spoke is as valuable as another spoke, and that it is only through the lens of the cult that some spokes are turned into good spokes and some spokes are turned into bad spokes. It is only through the lens of the cult that some feelings are acceptable and some are not, that some intensities are acceptable and some are not, that some thoughts are acceptable and some are not. Through the lens of the cult, the self is divided, fragmented, weakened, and turned in on itself. In doing so, the process of evolution of life grinds to a halt. And the consciousness bound up in the body, bound up in the ego, bound up in the instrumentation of the human heart and mind, struggles and wrestles in the chains laid on it by its cult, by its language, by its paradigm, by its thoughts and its beliefs. When the environment that produces certain personas is judged, is unacceptable, but is of course a natural byproduct of the environment around it, and a natural byproduct of the environment that is around it. When the personas that are created by a given environment are unacceptable, the vengeance, the rage, the hatred, the despair, the helplessness. I will not be helpless. I will die rather than feel helpless. And one watches one's daughter being raped by 5 angry men who feel helpless and will not stop until they reduce you to the helplessness they feel in vengeance towards a reality that would not lift them out of the helplessness that they are stuck in. And you will not feel helpless. You may act in a way that kills your daughter. Because people who are fixated, who are stuck in a part of the wheel, who cannot move because their ego, their lens, has been splintered and refracted to a point where the energy they're encountering is too big and overwhelming for a fractured and isolated lens, without support, without guidance, without wisdom. In a materialistic cult that leaves the ego empty and helpless, that ego gets arrested in a helpless state. And in an evolutionary path, when an ego is arrested in a helpless state because everyone refuses to help, the message that underlies that condition is a message that some people are more valuable than other people, that the species is in fact divided into Class A and Class B human beings. And that the reason that this person is stuck in helplessness for months or years is because they are not worth helping. This illusion that some people are better than others needs to be resolved for the species to evolve, for the species to be whole, for the species to reach its full potential. And so typically what begins to occur in a dynamic like that is the person who is trapped in a dis-ease of some form begins to pull other people into their disease. I'm stuck here and I can't move. Everyone around me considers this to be fine because I'm not a very valuable person. But let's start pulling valuable people into this stuck place together, maybe at gunpoint, maybe with a bomb, maybe I'll rape your daughter. Now, once an important person in the species understands where I'm stuck, maybe the dis-ease will get some attention. Now, in a sociopathic culture, this will not be what happens. What will happen is any degree of lying and cheating necessary to secure the release of the important people will occur. And then the unimportant person will be bombed or terrorized or put in prison and punished. And the paradigm will continue that there are more important people and there are less important people, and that the more important people are the only people worth helping, and so the less important people will remain stuck following the inheritance they have been given. Their ego is given a fractured lens of a disintegrated reality, leading them into a pain that is too big for them to deal with. And so their one hope of drawing the species' attention to the issue is to find important people and involve them in some way. And this is, in our culture, it's been called terrorism, because it is not considered terrorism for a cult to give egos a map that leads them into trauma and into terror and then leaves them there. That's not considered terrorism, even though it induces systemic terror in a large percentage of individuals on the planet. A large percentage of individuals on the planet are induced into terrified states and left there for decades. But that is not considered terrorism. That is considered any number of things. It's usually not talked about. What's considered terrorism is if those people draw attention to their stuck place by pulling people the cult considers valuable. Maybe someone who's rich, maybe someone who's beautiful, someone who's famous, someone who's this, into the disease, to draw attention to the disease. Because it's not fun to kill people. It's not fun to hurt people. It's not fun to be hated. It's not fun to hate. It's not fun to be angry. It's not fun to feel despair. It's not fun to be lonely. It can be more enjoyable to cause someone else suffering than to be left alone and invisible in suffering with the message that this will go on endlessly because you're not worth seeing. It can be more enjoyable to pull someone else in to that disease than it is to stay there silently and say, I better not tell any of these important people what's going on because I'd hate to bother them, and we all know that I'm not a valuable person, and so why should they be disturbed? That goes on so long, and then there is a transference. And it's saying, well, let's share this disease. Let's replicate the virus of faulty programming, of pain, of loneliness, enough so that it gets attention. And this is how viruses spread. When the AIDS virus hit the United States it came in the form of homosexuals, which to the Republicans and Reagan in power at the time were not as important people as the Christians who would never put a penis into another person's anus, except if it's a woman, of course, would never do such a horrible thing. And so the fact that they're being killed by a virus called AIDS is just fine. It was just fine until more heterosexuals started dying from AIDS than homosexuals. Then it wasn't fine anymore. And the species responded to heal the virus. Whenever you partition a group of people into worthwhile people and not worthwhile people, and then only help the worthwhile people, the delusion within an integrated species, within an integrated reality, that some people are more important than others, the delusion is shattered as the pain and the pattern of disease physically, emotionally, and mentally spreads till the point where it intersects with the, quote, valuable people. And that's when the dynamic changes. As long as you have one group of people, particularly with political and financial power, ignoring a problem because it's not their problem, the problem will grow until it is the problem of every wealthy person, of every politician. When wealthy people are being killed by a disease that's growing in a poor community, that's killing the daughter of a wealthy person, that's when the wealthy person starts donating and spending money to deal with the issue. In a cult like our own, in a cult of isolation and separation. So within our cult, we of course call this terrorism, and we cause more terror, as in Iraq, where we gave more than 1 million citizens PTSD, we cause more terror conducting a war on terror. And so now there are 1 million Iraqis who have varying degrees of hatred and resentment towards the abusive power of the United States, who, of course, are being ignored because they're not as valuable. They won't be as valuable until the next bomb that goes off in the United States. Then suddenly they will be valuable, indirectly. When you demand that in order to have value, you have to cause pain to someone who is considered more valuable than you are inciting violence. You are inciting a transference of pain rather than a healing of pain, because it is a painful message. When you split the whole into valuable people and invaluable people, it is a painful message. Pain always migrates unattended towards violence, towards violation, because the pain itself is a violation. The human heart is designed to tell us, that hurts me. If I don't want to hear that that hurts you, because I don't want to feel your hurt, then I turn away. I say, well, that's your hurt, it's not mine, it's your fault, it's not mine. I'll leave you in your hurt. The very act of turning away hurts the part of ourselves that is most integrated as a species. And the species functioning synergistically as a whole has the highest probability field. A unified species functioning as a whole has the highest probability field of abundance, of joy, of empowerment, of meeting its human needs. That is the underlying mathematical reality. In the same way that at an individual level, when we integrate our dark and our light shadow, our feminine and our masculine, our heart, mind, and body, our inner child, our grown-up, and our future, when we integrate that in an adult expression of excellence, in a science-based dance of love, love which facilitates survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, love, the discipline, the behavior that increases the probability field of abundance. As an individual, our potential on the planet goes up exponentially as we integrate and deteriorates as we disintegrate into parts I don't want to look at, parts that I'm afraid people will see, parts that I'm not sure about, parts that I want people to see even though they're not true, as we disintegrate into all of these factions and engage in a battle of control and suppression within the psyche. The probability field, the possibility field of our existence rapidly deteriorates towards pain, towards insanity, towards dis-ease. And the identical is true for the species as a whole. In a group that does not welcome its transgender, that doesn't welcome its women, that doesn't honor the feelings of a child, that which is dishonored in any ecology becomes a curse. Because that which is dishonored and violated must dishonor and violate that which violates it in order for the whole to be restored into balance. Because despite the stupidity, the ignorance of the lenses provided by our cult, every piece of the circle has an equal and sacred place in the whole, in the sphere, and cannot exist without every other piece. If a single atom in a single part of the multiverse changes the law of gravity so that it can be different, the entire gravitational law is changed for everyone. In the same way that if you go into court and politic to make a law that will apply to you, it will apply to everyone else. Because that is the definition of a law, a universally applied pattern. Well, universal laws apply to the entire universe, such as gravity, etc. Energy outside the set and outside the self that we are not conscious of entered the ecological circles of the body, of physicality, of thoughts, of feelings, of sensation, of persona, environment, and personality in ecological relationship. And like a bicycle wheel, like a marble, following this roller coaster, if it is arrested, if it is taboo at any point on the wheels, that marble stops at that point. If we go through the whole ages but get to a certain thought and I cannot think that thought, I am determined not to think that thought, the marble comes to rest at the point just before that thought. And it does not resume until the energy built up to block thinking that thought is removed and the path of the marble continues. If there's a sensation of disgust that I will not own and will not feel, the marble comes to rest and I dissociate from my body and I stop moving forward. A part of me stays stuck at what I will not face because the marble is the ego. What I will not see, what I will not feel, what I will not think, what I will not acknowledge, what I will not sensate is where I am stuck. Because I am the marble going through the wheel. And if I can accept myself here, and accept myself here, and accept myself here, but I cannot accept myself here, the marble comes to rest here, where I block the flow. Regardless of what you think about life, the set of the species, what you think about human beings, what you think about yourself, a part of the larger ecology gave itself to become you in your current stuck form. And it will remain arrested like a marble traveling a roller coaster. It will become arrested wherever you decide you cannot face that, you cannot see that, you cannot know that, you are not that, and you have more energy invested in stopping. You cannot get to the end of the DVD if you come to a certain frame and you say, I will not go forward. The DVD stops until you're willing and able to face that part of the circle. The end of the journey is to arrive at the beginning and know it for the first time. Bound up in the cloak of ego, of language, of cult, of paradigm, of belief, we are contained within the limitations of those languages, of those cults, of those beliefs and paradigms. And within those limitations must navigate the time-space continuum of our life as an ego. If, during the course of our life, we are able to face and see and feel and sensate without binding up, without an attachment to staying here or without an attachment to moving away, we have what's called enlightenment. We're light from the self that is bigger than our prison, then our limitation floods into the system, and we connect with a part of ourselves during the lifetime that is bigger than the cult and thus bigger than the human ego. When we bind up, I can't let this, I can't let them, they can't do this to me, I won't let this, I won't feel this, I won't acknowledge that, I won't let you go. I won't let you hurt me like that again. When we bind up at any point in the wheel, we preclude the enlightenment. We preclude the flow of life. We create suffering because the marbles start piling up. Another breath of the psyche comes through and bangs into the last marble. I won't move forward. Well, I can't move forward if you don't move forward. Well, I'm not moving forward. And it's bound up. Within the paradigm of philosophies and world religions, this takes us closest to Buddhism with the focus of non-attachment, with an awareness that we are energy that is bigger than the instrumentation we are identifying with, moving through a 360-degree radial circle that involves hate, love, and innocence all on the same wheel. as Rumi talks about in the guest house, come in all. Come in all my relations, my fears, my angers, my rage, my hate. Come in, the lonely waif. Come in, the homeless. Come in, the insane. Come in. I welcome you all as part of myself. And in the welcoming transit through. In the welcoming transit through. And that which we cannot face and accept in ourselves, we cannot face and accept in another, which is where the violation and violence towards ourself becomes the violation and violence towards the other, mirroring the pattern of childhood. For the areas that we cannot accept ourselves are the areas that no human being has fully loved and accepted us with certainty. And so we cannot accept those parts of ourselves that were rejected by others. And so we cannot love the parts of ourselves that we reject, that we judge, that we block. You see, judgment is neither good nor bad. It's just a block that says nothing's going past here. If you get to hate and rage, I'm not feeling it, because that's bad. So I'm going to erect a force field. I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to develop an addiction. I'm going to do something that says I, the human ego, am not acknowledging the fact that I hate, that I feel helpless, that I feel rage. I'm not acknowledging that reality. Every time I get near it, I'm just going to get drunk because I'm not that kind of person, or I can't possibly. Which means that anyone else, typically our partner, who goes into that domain, must be stopped as well. They must be stopped. They must be punished as violently as we punish ourselves. They must be hated as violently as we hate ourselves. Because the brain is an integrity-creating machine. We have two choices. We have two choices when we apply a standard. If we say that gay people are bad, and we're gay, then we say that we are bad. That's the first choice. The second choice is to go insane, is to disintegrate, is to split the self in half, partition half of it this way and half of it this way, and then have the judgmental self say that gay people are bad, but I'm not gay, and have the gay part, that we are completely separate and unable to function because the conscious mind is connected to the judgmental part. You see, the self is like a rope. And this is why insanity has such a high price. Because we do have hypocrites. We do have blindness. We have Republicans violently hating gay people in our country. We have sex offenders violently condemning other sex offenders. We have parents who abuse their children condemning other parents who abuse their children. We have a split cult. Whenever you take a rope and cut it in half, and then put half over here and half over here, just to allow the expediency of our judgmental critical part being able to remain righteous as it judges the part that we pretend is not part of us, we have halved our integrity. And when you cut a rope down the middle in half, you lose half of its strength, but you also do damage some of the rope that remains on both sides is now in pain. Pain is simply the signal sent by the heart when we have cut ourselves in a way that creates separation from and longing for. When I say, I hate you, I never want to see you again, I'm not just saying that to the other person. I'm saying that to the part in me that is doing those things. I'm not just saying that to the other person. I'm doing that to the part in me that is doing those things. In the process, I'm creating pain by first dividing myself and then having one part of myself fight another part of myself, which is weakening me in two levels. The first is the separation, and the second is taking half of me and battling the other half. There's very little energy left over. If you take your body and cut it in half, and then try and have your right hand pull the left hand of your split body, good luck with that. We do this mentally all the time. We partition parts of who we are. And so we have two choices. We either attack ourselves brutally and say, I hate you and I hate myself, and I own that I'm like you, but I still hate you because I hate myself, but we're together. So that's, you stay integrated, but you are attacking yourself. The other is you go insane. You say, me? No. There's nothing homophobic or anything like that around me. No. I hate you and want you put to death and because I just woke up one morning and that seemed like the thing to do. It has nothing to do with my own self-hatred. No. I am insane. I am disintegrated to a point of incoherency. I have split and broken up the self. In this dynamic, you pay the price either way. You deepen your insanity, or you face the grief of mirroring whatever pain we cause to other people to some part of ourself when we intend to cause pain. Ultimately, with death, we transcend our beliefs. We transcend the ego that has the beliefs. We transcend the ego that has the paradigms. We transcend the language and thoughts that house those paradigms, and we return outside the set of the human ego. When we transcend the ages, the feelings, the sensations, and the environment during a lifetime through the lens of ego, being able to relax into something bigger and more whole, we have enlightenment. We have healing. We have peace. We have love. When we do not and are fixated, we stay stuck. We stay stuck until the point of liberation and death. And we have lived in hell. We have lived in isolation. We have lived in delusion. We have lived separate from the whole. We have lived in shame. We have lived in trauma. We have lived in the hell of beliefs that say I'm not valuable. We are stuck in hell until our body liberates us from the cult into which we were unconsciously born. Spirituality during a lifetime is about reclaiming our right to feel every feeling, to think every thought, to understand every one of our personas produced by our environment, to create beauty, truth, and goodness, to transcend the cult and return to something more symmetrical than the paradigms, beliefs, and languages that we were given. It becomes a path of healing and an excited anticipation of the full transcendence of the system as the energy that came into the system returns. And right at the edge, right in that liminal doorway between the system and the reality in which the system no longer exists, we can celebrate. We can celebrate. We can savor and enjoy for a moment, a timeless liminal moment. How free we were, and how much freedom we brought to others trapped within our system. I see you, and it's a pleasure to share this moment together as we bind ourselves through language and thoughts into a paradigm, into a system that can take us to another system that's a little bit more free, a little bit lighter, and arrive at the end of the system, at the end of the container, and know it with a little bit more awareness for the first time.